Hello there, and welcome to Master of Horror, a series of true scary, ghost, wendigo, and cryptid stories that I've gathered from all across the internet and what I have heard throughout the years. These videos have rain in the background so as to help you relax and sleep. I hope you enjoy true paranormal wendigo and cryptids stories. Okay, now let's begin. Paranormal story number 1. My best friend became a wendigo. In this true story, some names have been changed. My friend Roger, after not hearing from him for about 2 years, came to me and asked me to help go with him to a cabin in the woods about 2 hours from where I lived, so he could show me and tell me something that was very important. I went ahead and got into his car, and we headed to his cabin. This was a huge surprise to me, for I hadn't heard from him in 2 years. While in the car, he did not look the same as I remembered him. I asked him how he was doing, but he didn't answer that. He said, "Ben, I know it's been a long time. I was hoping you would have answered me like you did, and I thank you for that." The whole ride over there to the cabin felt really awkward, and I knew that he must have been in some kind of trouble, so I asked him, "Roger, is everything okay? Are you in any kind of trouble?" Roger looked at me with a straight face as sweat began to come down his forehead. He said, "I need your help with something, Ben. I really do. You're the only one I could trust at this point." I looked at Roger in the eyes and I told him, "Is Samantha okay?" Roger didn't answer me. It was quiet pretty much the whole way to the cabin. I actually looked over at him while he was driving, but no matter how much I tried, not look like my best friend Roger. There was just something about his face. He then parked in front of a cabin and said, "We're here." So I got off and waited for him to open the cabin front door. He went in and waited for me to come in behind him, and then he locked the cabin front door, and he sat down in front of a fireplace that was already lit. There were 2 chairs in the room in front of this fireplace, one for him and one for me. Roger then said, "Let me finish talking first, and I promise you that anything that you want to ask I will answer. Just please sit down across from me and listen to everything I have to say. I will make it quick." So I've known Roger my whole life. I knew there was something very serious going on. So as a friend, the best thing that I could do is just listen to what he had to say. So I sat down across from him and said, "Go ahead and speak." Roger said, "When I moved to Canada with Samantha, my fiancée, 2 years ago, everything was perfect. We had the perfect idea of a family and of our future together. A year into living with her in Canada, she started talking to some old friends that she had in school and would come home late at night. I didn't see this as a problem because I've always trusted Samantha. She began to act weird. She started dressing in all black, and there were times where she didn't even look like herself. The first thing that popped up in my mind is I suspected that she was cheating on me, or maybe there was someone else she was talking to, but that was far from the truth. Sometimes she came home really late, and I would ask her, why is she coming home so late? And she said, it's okay, don't worry. I'm not messing around behind your back. There was something I really had to do after work that was very important. This went on for a couple of months, until it got so bad that she would not show back up at home days at a time. I started to notice that her skin would look more pale, but yet she would look more younger. She looked vibrant and her eyes had a sort of a glow to it. She looked so young, way younger than she really is. There were times I could not even keep up with her. But everything changed one night. She had said that she wanted to play a game, so she tied me up to a chair and put handcuffs on me, on both of my wrists, tightly. I thought she was going to do something kind of naughty, something that we've never done before. But I've always trusted her, so I went along with everything she did. She said, I'm going to call a friend over. But I didn't understand why she would want to call one of her friends. But by the time I knew, somebody had came to the front door, and it was quiet for a while. I wanted to get up to see what was going on. I couldn't do anything. She even put duct tape around my mouth, so I couldn't scream. I didn't understand what was going on. When I heard screaming come from outside the bedroom door, my eyes widened with fear. The door opened to my room where I was, and Samantha started pulling in her so-called friend by the legs. He was unconscious, and I've never seen this guy before. I didn't know if she was joking around, but when she grabbed a hammer and bashed his head in, I knew this was for real. She began eating the flesh off of him. I started screaming, even though I had tape around my mouth. She looked at me and smiled and said, "This is what I've been hiding from you for the past year. I am a flesh eater, and that's why I am so vibrant and alive, and I want you to become like me." She grabbed the knife and hacked off his arm and put it to my mouth and said, "Bite and eat." With the same knife that she used to take his arm off, she put it to my throat, and I said, "Please, don't kill me." I was starting to beg her. I had no choice. I decided to trust in her, even though I knew at that point that she was a I had no choice but to bite the arm, and so I ate as she said. The flesh tasted awful at first, but as soon as I was done having a few bites, something changed inside of me. For some weird reason, I began to want more. She started laughing, and she saw that I started eating more and more without her pushing me to do it. Hearing my friend Roger telling me all of this stuff made me sick. I said, "Roger, are you okay? Are you sure you're telling me the truth?" Roger got very angry, and he screamed like I've never heard him scream before, and said, "Just listen to me. I would never lie to you. Please listen to me." I leaned back in my chair. Roger said, "Ben, I'm almost done. Please, just listen." So Roger continued to say that the weeks went on, and he began to have a taste for human flesh. He said me and Samantha went on crazy eating binges, eating sprees where we would kill and eat humans. It started with maybe one person a week to where it became almost an everyday thing. Roger looked at me with tears in his eyes and said, Ben, please believe me. I've been consuming flesh every day for months, but have gotten to the point to where now I cannot live like this. I asked Roger, where is Samantha? What happened to her? Roger then said, you see, about 2 weeks ago, Samantha started to change. I woke up one night and her body became that of a creature, and she had eyes that were no longer green but turned red. I even found her one night drooling as if she wanted to eat me. When we were outside one night, she went up to me crying, telling me that she did not want to live like this no more. So I started crying because I missed the Samantha that I used to know, the Samantha that didn't eat humans, the Samantha that had a beautiful heart. You see, Ben, the people that she was hanging around with must have been also Wendigos, a creature that eats off the human flesh and survives. All I remember is grabbing the gun, and while her back was turned towards me, I shot her in the back of the head. When I did, I kid you not, her body became that of a creature. Her true self came out, and her skin became slimy. Claws were formed in front of my face. As she lay dead, I had no choice but to bury my very own Samantha. So you see, Ben, I came to you to ask you a favor. You see, I cannot kill myself. It will be too hard. In order to break the curse, someone has to kill me. I came to ask you to please help me in my life. If you do this, the curse will be broken, and I will no longer have a hunger for flesh. As Roger was telling me this, I noticed his eyes were turning red. I noticed that his hands were gripping his pants tighter and tighter. At this point, Roger said something that I'll never, ever forget. What he said chilled me to the core. Roger then said, Ben, even now, I am fighting it with all I can, the urge to want to get out of this chair and eat you alive. You see, Ben, you're my best friend, but even you have the possibility of being eaten alive at this very moment, for my hunger for human flesh is too great at this moment. I ate flesh, human flesh, just hours before coming here. You see, Ben, on the way to the cabin to get ready and set the fire going, planning everything that I was going to tell you, I passed by a rest stop, and there was a family which consisted of a husband, a wife, and 2 kids. They were in their car, and I spotted them. I was watching them as they got out and walked into the rest stop. Not only did I eat and devour all of them, but in the back of my car, there are body parts. He said, Ben, if you want proof, just look in the back seat of my car. So I got up, I walked outside, and I peeked into the back seat of his car, which he had a cloth covering something. So I opened his door, and I picked up the cloth, and there were 4 heads, 4 human heads. I quickly covered the heads back with the cloth, and I threw up on the floor. I ran back inside and sat down. Roger looked at me in the eyes and said, you see, I'm telling you the truth. I'm not lying to you. I am a monster, and I asked you to please, before I hurt anyone else, kill me, Ben. Just kill me. Look, right there. I have a loaded shotgun. Please blow my brains out so I do not hurt anyone else. I was really scared because for the first time I was going to kill someone, but not just anyone. It was my best friend I was going to murder. My best friend Roger. The Roger that I've known since we were kids, since the 2nd grade. Roger continued to speak and said, When you're done killing me, I have in the glove compartment $50,000 that I saved up that I will give to you that you can have. That is my life savings right now. That is what me and Samantha accumulated throughout the years. In the back of my car, I also have gasoline and matches. I want you to torch the cabin. Torch it to the ground. I looked at Roger and I told him, okay, I will do it. I will do it for you. That's the least I can do. I quickly looked at Roger's eyes and I saw hope in his eyes. He smiled. He smiled, and for the first time I saw him smile, and I knew that he was going to be at peace. He knew he was going to be in a way better place. I got up off my chair and I grabbed the shotgun and I walked up to Roger. My hands began to shake. I've never ever killed anything in my entire life, let alone a human being. Roger looked up at me and said, yes, Ben, please. Just then he stops me and says, wait, Ben, thank you. Thank you for doing this. And I love you. I closed my eyes and I started to pull the trigger back until I felt an explosion coming from the shotgun. The vibration alone shocked my whole body, starting from my arms to my head. The shotgun blast was so powerful that it jerked me back. All I remember is my own face got covered in warm liquid. It was blood. I quickly ran to the kitchen and rinsed my face off, not wanting any of the Wendigo blood in my mouth. It touched my eyes. It ran down my face. I didn't want this on me. I quickly was trying to clean myself off. I think this was traumatizing. I walked to the chair of where he was sitting, and he had no head. I went to the back of the car, and I quickly took the gasoline out, and I torched the cabin. I watched from the outside the cabin going up in flames. The whole cabin, with my best friend Roger and any memories that he's ever had, were up in flames. But just then, while the cabin was in flames, I forgot that he had the key in his pocket to the car, and I was going to be stuck there in the woods. But it was way too late. The flames were too big at that point, and smoke filled the cabin. I had no choice but to leave the key in his pocket. I ran to the back of the car and I grabbed a backpack that he had, and I went to the glove compartment and I pulled out the $50,000 in cash. I also grabbed the handgun that he had in his car. I hurried up and I put gasoline on the car, and I also lit that on fire. I ran towards the dirt road on the main path out of there. As I was walking, many thoughts were going through my mind. I was able to hitchhike my way back to where I lived. I rented a motel for a couple of days, not wanting to go to my house. And here I am writing this down on the desk in the motel room, that everything that I have written down and that has happened is true. That there are such things as Wendigos and the paranormal, and these things do exist. I don't know if I'll have nightmares. I hope I don't. But most of all, to Roger, I hope you're in a better place, my friend. Goodbye. Me and my uncle are Mexican and Native American, and this happened in the Mojave Desert in South California. He was driving around with his girlfriend late at night, and they saw something that looked like a huge black dog on the side of the road. He slowed down, and the dog then began crossing the road. Instead of walking like a normal dog, this thing moved like a toy rocking horse. He said it stopped in the middle of the road and stared at them, and its eyes had a red glow. My uncle is the most coolest badass person in the world. He didn't even get scared. Nothing scares him. A man from the reservation has just delivered a bull to a buyer's ranch out far in the reservation. He starts getting lost, and in a couple of hours it gets late. It's a lot of land, and what maps are available aren't always available. Anyways, it's late and getting dark by the time he gets on the main road towards home. Just as he gets to the intersection where there's no stop sign, he sees up ahead, right in the middle of the road, a lone coyote is just standing there. So before he starts driving, he leans on the horn, and in response, he watches as the coyote raises up on its back legs. It resumes the form of a man. Only his legs and feet, arms and hands seem more canine than human, and it starts walking towards the opposite shoulder. The man, not believing what he's seen, closes his eyes and shakes his head. When again he looks, there's a coyote sitting off to the side of the road and looking back at him, as if it's waiting on him to drive by. The man is certain that it's the lights playing tricks on him, and the fact that he has been on a long drive must be draining him. However, as he passes that coyote, he gives it a quick look, and he sees that this coyote is grinning at him. Having heard stories of skinwalkers, the man blesses himself, and he fixes his eyes on the road. Hello there, and welcome to Master of Horror, where I give you the most scariest paranormal true stories that I've ever come across. These stories are guaranteed to scare you, and if not, then I'm not doing my job. I've only chosen the scariest stories to post. If you like what you hear, please like and subscribe so I can give you more true paranormal stories that are guaranteed to petrify you. These are 3 true Ouija board encrypted stories in the rain, number 27. Okay, let's begin. True paranormal story number 1. The Ouija board. It was a cold December night in 2003. It was a Saturday, and we organized a small gathering for my friend Olivia's birthday with our closest friends. Everything was going well in a pretty good atmosphere. There weren't very many people there. I would say about 20 people in total, but I remember around 2 o'clock in the morning, Anna, another friend of mine, suggested that Olivia open the gifts she had received, since only about 8 of us were left. While everybody was laughing, she opened them one by one until it was time to open Anna's gift that she had brought. When Olivia opened Anna's gift, it looked like a board game, and we all thought it was supposedly just a random board game, but no, it was actually a Ouija board. A Ouija board, supposedly, is when one makes contact with beings from beyond this realm, so most of us made a gesture of displeasure. But Anna, the one who bought the board game, told us to calm down, that she knew a lot about these things, and that everything would be fine, that not all spirits are bad. After some time, about half of the people decided to leave, and half of us were arguing that playing the Ouija board was a very foolish thing to do. I agreed with them, but my curiosity was too great. I thought to myself, how could it be possible to communicate with spirits through a simple board? It was around 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the morning when my friends placed the Ouija board on a small table. Everyone sat around it, and it was illuminated by some candles. Anna was very well prepared. Once again, they urged me to play, but I refused. I felt that I was already risking too much by just being there. So, there was about 5 of us in total. Olivia, Sophia, Matt, Anna, and me. Matt actually spoke out and said he was going to just stay over as an observer and made everyone promise that if anything strange happened, we would immediately stop the game. That actually made me feel a little bit safer when he said that. About 15 minutes passed and absolutely nothing happened. The planchette didn't even move. For those who don't know, the planchette is a small triangular piece that is placed on the board, and it indicates letter by letter what the entity is trying to say. It meant there was no spirit in contact with us, so for a moment there I was a little bit relieved. But surprisingly, after a few more minutes, it began to move. Everyone started asking questions. Some questions were about things that only we knew about, but the spirit answered them with great certainty. You can say everything was going well, but then something terrible happened. We asked about the cause of death of an acquaintance of ours, about whether there were other spirits besides him, and then right after that question, we asked whether or not it was a good or evil spirit. The planchette moved toward yes when we asked if it was an evil spirit. Just then, suddenly, a door that was situated right behind us slammed shut. Later on, Sophia thought she heard someone call her name, but I certainly didn't hear anything. But what I am sure about is that the candle that I was holding started to shake. As a result, I dropped it on the floor. I tried to leave, and they tried to stop me. Anna told me that I couldn't just leave like that, as they had to say goodbye to the spirit first. But overcome with panic, I ignored their words. Everyone else stayed that I remember. I didn't hear from my friends for the next few days. Later on, I found out that things worsened. After I left, they told me that the spirit was asked its name, which it responded with a very strange and hard to pronounce name. I'm sorry that I can't tell you what it is, but not even they could remember it. They also told me that leaving there was the best thing I could have done by not being directly involved in the game. The risk I ran by leaving was lesser. As I mentioned, one of the most important rules of the Ouija is that you cannot leave the site until the entity allows you to go, and it says goodbye. As I understand it, that spirit was not allowing them to leave. Perhaps one of the strangest things is that no one noticed the things that others were perceiving. Matt explained he heard footsteps running towards him, but no one else noticed it. Also, in a really weird manner, Sophia started laughing hysterically while looking towards the patio, exactly through the door that had slammed a few moments before. She also collapsed to the floor. The rest affirmed they hadn't seen anything there. Olivia said she heard footsteps on the roof and some howling like that of an animal, and likewise no one else was aware of that. Anna clearly heard a scream in the distance and felt someone push her backwards, and from what I know, it was at that point when everyone ran out without properly ending the game. I think, as I did, that it was all just collective paranoia, and the perfect proof of that was that no one was aware of what the other was experiencing. But now, 25 years after that night, I truly believe everything that happened with my friends was merely not just coincidence. Because since that time, only 2 of us are alive. Matt, about a month later, began to suffer terrible headaches and a sudden weight loss. Then ultimately, he passed away. Doctors were unable to accurately diagnose an illness, and this terrified us all without communicating with each other. We all came to blame the Ouija board. Olivia was unalived by her boyfriend a few months later. It's really strange because he seemed to be a good person, and I don't know what could have happened between them. Also, from that day on, Sophia was not well mentally. She occasionally experienced bouts of laughter and hysteria, kind of like that night when she was playing with the Ouija board. And as for Anna and I, we share the same fate as we started to experience the same mental torture. In my case, I began by hearing a voice calling me, and later I started to see shadows with strange shapes. Although some have humanoid forms, I must say that I have managed to get used to this over time. But there is something that's strange. There is one that particularly allows itself to be seen for longer. It appears to be a very tall man, I would say about 7 foot tall, and very thin. And I cannot see his arms, nor does he have any features. I've tried to record it, but I've never been successful. And I don't know if someone is listening to this story that may know why every time I see that man, my ears get plugged and my muscles tense up, and I am overwhelmed with fear every time I see him. I can go days or even months without seeing him, but then, out of nowhere, when I least expect it, he pops up again. He has never tried to attack me or anything. He just stands there, looking at me strangely. I thank God that I enjoy good health, and I think I'll be fine. I haven't heard those voices calling me in the last few years. The only things that can be said to be wrong in my life are those lurking shadows that are very strange, that pop up sometimes. As for Anna, she is not doing well at all. She experiences the same phenomena as I do. But intriguingly, she hears the man speaking in a strange language, and she doesn't know what he is saying at all. She says that she feels that it is definitely not something good. She has contacted and consulted with a couple of different priests, but not even they can bring comfort to her. She started having bone pain and went to many doctors. Some say she has cancer, while others believe it's just all in her head. The last time I visited her, she told me that she saw the man that I saw, but when she saw him, he had arms and he was holding up her wedding dress. She feels that thing will come for her pretty soon, and honestly, we are very scared. I don't know what will happen, but I ask that you can offer a prayer on behalf of her. I'm almost sure that after her, it will come for me next. However, I am aware that I must face the consequences. The only hope that I have, looking back, is that the 3 people that did leave early had prosperous, happy lives, and nothing happened to them. I am one of those that left early. True paranormal story number 2, The Haunted Apartment. Hi, I used to live in a townhouse in Rosenberg, Texas in the mid-1990s. We had an older man named Johnny who was the maintenance man, and he had a friend named Ted that would help him do maintenance work for the townhouses. So when people would move out, Johnny and Ted would have to clean up the apartment, fix it up, and get it ready for new occupants. Johnny would tell me that people would leave the most outrageous things behind. He claims that most people never even cleaned up the place when they left, leaving most of their valuables behind. Well, one day, Johnny the maintenance man told me that something horrible happened to him the night before when he spent the night in one of the apartments that he was cleaning out. He claims that he was alone in the apartment around 1 o'clock in the morning, and instead of driving back home, he decided to spend the night since there was so much work to be done. Ted, his friend that usually helps him, didn't come that night, so Johnny was alone. The electricity was off, but Johnny had his flashlight, and he said that he had some candles with him, and he made a small sleeping area on the carpet floor and laid down to sleep to try to get some rest before he had to wake up in a few hours to start work again. He claims that in the middle of the night, he was awoken by someone calling his name in the room. No one was in the room at the time. He thought it was his imagination and went back to sleep. He then woke up, and again, about an hour later, feeling sharp pain coming from his feet. When he moved the blanket from his feet, he saw that he had red marks on his feet, as if someone was scratching his feet. He said it was really painful, and he got up and walked around the room. He then heard a noise coming from the closet. That's when he opened the closet door, and to his surprise, there was a Ouija board on the top shelf. Whoever lived there cleaned out the whole apartment, but left the Ouija board behind. He got chills all over his body when he saw it, and quickly threw the board in the trash outside the apartment. He went back to sleep, and then was awoken a third time, feeling pain coming from his feet, as if something was punching the bottom of his feet. He jumped up and quickly opened the closet door to see if the board was still there, and to his surprise, even after throwing the Ouija board away, the board was in the same original spot it was in, on the closet shelf. He got his keys as fast as he could, claiming that it felt as if he was being watched the whole time. His flashlight didn't work anymore for some reason, and he couldn't find his candles. He had to find his way in the dark out of the apartment. He claims while he was going down the stairs in the dark, he heard something right behind him, following him down the stairs. While he was driving away, he said he saw a cloaked black figure looking out the bedroom window that he was sleeping in. He said he never went back to that apartment, and he's always stayed away from Ouija boards. True paranormal story number 3, the haunted Needville house. In 2003, me and my wife got married and lived with my parents in Needville, Texas. We lived in a haunted house on Line Street. Many paranormal things in that house happened. For example, one day when my dad was alone washing dishes, he claims that my wife was standing in the hallway staring at him for about 5 minutes. When he looked up and acknowledged her and asked her if everything was okay, she just turned around and walked away. Since that encounter, many other things happened after that. One night, when me and my wife were asleep in the room, it was extremely cold, so we covered up the air condition vents. To our surprise, it got even colder, to where we could see our breath in the air. When we woke up the following morning, my wife had my jacket on her. I never put it on her, nor did she remember putting on a jacket. This was really confusing, but we completely tried to forget about it. But the really scariest incident is which occurred on a Saturday night around 3 o'clock in the morning, when my older brother came to spend the night on the living room floor because he had too much to drink that night and he didn't want to drive home. He claims while he was asleep on the floor, someone turned the ceiling fan on full blast. It began to rock side to side and make a loud noise. Despite this, and the fact that he had been drinking, he was able to fall asleep through it all. Then, about 10 to 15 minutes later, he claims he woke up and not only was a ceiling fan about to fall off the ceiling from going extremely fast, but when he tried to get up, something was holding his arms and his legs down. He couldn't get up, nor could he even move. The most that he said he could do was look around with his eyes. He tried to say God's name, and even that couldn't come out of his mouth. He was basically paralyzed and petrified. After about 2 minutes, he was then released. He got up and ran to my mother's room and told her what happened. After my mom walked around the living room praying out loud, my older brother decided to drive home. He was too traumatized to stay. The scariest part about everything is my room was right next to the living room area. After he left that night, me and my wife heard giggling and laughing coming from the living room. I mustered up the courage and I left my room and walked towards the living room, and I saw a black figure sitting on the sofa. The laughing stopped and the giggling, but I ran back to my room and locked the door. I was petrified. We eventually moved out of that house, but to this day you could still see a black figure on the front door window when you pass by that exact house in Needville, Texas. Thank you for listening to Master of Horror. If you like what you've heard, again, please like and subscribe so you can continue to get true paranormal scary stories in the rain. Alright, my friends, for now, good night. And don't forget to leave the nightlight on. Hi, and welcome to Master of Horror, where I bring you the most scariest stories that I've ever come by. I would like to apologize for not posting last week. I have been in the process of moving, and now I will be back on schedule. I have a real scary personal story that involves my daughter, whose apartment is truly haunted. I cannot believe the things that I've seen on her camera. The next episode, I will bring you the horror that I've witnessed. Please help me get to 1,000 subscribers and give this video a thumbs up. So now, my friends, please dive with me into the depths of horror with these 3 scary, true, paranormal, and horror stories with Thunderstorm sounds. Number 30. True paranormal story number 1. My paranormal experiences. It is very likely that something is haunting our house. Through the years, I've experienced quite a few supernatural things in the house, like hearing footsteps when no one is around. The footsteps come from areas that are no longer walkable, like walking through closet walls and windows. Things and objects are thrown from shelves, but they don't just fall. They'll be lifted several inches into the air, hang there for a moment, and then get thrown to the ground with great force. And we always try to find a logical explanation. But after a while, we try to ignore these paranormal experiences or find a rational explanation. One experience involves my younger brother and sister. When my brother was a toddler, he woke up one morning and told the whole family that during the night he got out of bed and went downstairs. When he got there, an old lady yelled at him to get back to bed. My younger sister had the same experience a few years later. They were both about 2 or 3 years old when it happened. So my sister hadn't even been born when it happened to my older brother. But the time it happened to her, my brother had completely forgotten that it happened to him. So it is very unlikely that he told her about it. Over the years, my parents and I have tried to explain it away, telling ourselves that they were only dreaming, but the fact that they both described the lady in nearly identical terms does prove that they just might be telling the truth. They claim they saw this old lady in the newest part of the house too. You see, we added a new section to the house that we built back in 2007. I've never felt comfortable in that part of the house, despite it being the most newest. All that was on the land before we built the addition was a single tree and some grass, but I feel very uncomfortable there. For a couple of years, the activity actually stopped, but it started up again recently. Recently, I've had books thrown around in my bedroom, and my mother woke up a few days ago when she thought that she heard my sister coming down the hallway. You see, my sister always asks my mom to do her hair in the morning, despite being old enough to do it herself. That particular morning, my mom didn't want to do my sister's hair, so she pretended to still be asleep. After a little while, she heard a voice next to her calling, "Mom, Mom, Mommy," whispering, thinking it was my sister. About 30 seconds passed, and my sister hadn't tried to shake my mom awake or sit on the bed as she normally does in the morning. My mom decided to open her eyes, only to find that she was completely alone in the room, and my sister was still in her own bed asleep. My parents' bedroom was located directly above the room where my brother and sister saw that old lady. So now we've had an old entity and a child entity that may be connected to the land or the original house. Having lived in this house as long as we have, we're not entirely bothered by most of the things that have happened, and nothing ever really harmed us. As for the voice calling out to my mom and addressing her as Mommy, well, that did spook us a lot, because it's the most concrete thing that's happened to us, and it's the hardest to explain away. Paranormal True Story Number 2, The Ghost Bride. This happened in late March in India. I was 14 years old. This happened in my village. There was no cinema, so I had to travel about 12 kilometers to get to the nearest theater. We usually went to the movies in groups, but one day none of my friends wanted to go, so I headed out alone for the evening show. Afterwards, I was dropped off at a bus stop that's located at the edge of my village. It was around 11 p.m., and my village being very small, I was all alone with no one around. I started walking towards home along the main road. After walking for about 20 minutes, I saw a woman. She was dressed in white and red. I felt really scared, and I knew she couldn't be human. She was covering her face with the garment, just like newlyweds do in India. So, I assumed she was a new bride. I thought to myself, what's a newlywed bride doing out here, all alone, late at night? She was just standing there with only trees surrounding her. I called down to where she was and asked if she needed help, but instead of answering, she started walking into the trees, and I found myself following her all the way. But no matter how fast I walked, I was never able to catch up to her. She was always ahead of me. After a while, I regained consciousness. I looked around and discovered that I had wandered into the middle of a jungle. Suddenly, all the scary stories that my elders ever told me came back to my memory, and I stood there frozen in fear. I remember that in our culture, an evil spirit will appear dressed as a newlywed bride with no legs. Slowly, I looked down at the woman's legs and realized she didn't have any at all. I wanted to run, but the thought of her being behind me and possibly chasing me down made me feel sick and nauseous. I had chills and goosebumps all over my body. Just as all of this was coming through my mind, she stopped and turned to look at me. At that very moment, I told myself, you better run or you're gonna die right here. So I ran, and when I got close to my home, I started screaming for my mother. I then felt something grab my shoulder. It felt like a claw-like heavy hand. I screamed one last scream that I was barely able to do. My mother and brothers came outside and asked me what was wrong. I explained everything to them. They looked at my back because I said it was hurting, and there they saw claw-like scratch marks. My mother performed some rituals before letting me into the house. She wanted to ward off evil spirits so that it would never enter our home. I suffered from a very high fever for 3 days straight after seeing that evil bride. Once I was healthy again, I asked my mom if there were any new brides in our village or any surrounding village, and she said no, there was not. I still went to the movies after that, but only during the day, and never, ever alone at night again. Paranormal True Story number 3, Bloody Mary. When I was 12 years old, I became very interested in the paranormal. So my friend told me about standing in front of a mirror and reciting the words Bloody Mary several times in a row. Supposedly, this Bloody Mary would show up in person if you do that. I wanted to try it, but I was too afraid to do it alone. So one day, this friend and I stayed after school. After everyone had left, we walked down through the empty hall in the girls' bathroom in front of the mirror and began saying Bloody Mary 5 times in a row. We then heard a very strange female voice calling our names. We were terrified, and we ran out into the hallway, but nobody was around. 2 days later, I was sleeping in my upstairs bedroom, and I was awoken around 2 in the morning by the sound of crying. My parents were downstairs in their bedroom asleep, and there were no TVs or radios on at the time. I was terribly frightened because it sounded like a young woman crying right there next to me in my room. Then, I will never forget what happened next. I looked up and I saw a lady standing next to my bed weeping. She was very pale and had tears coming down her face. Her head was surrounded by massive unruly black hair. She wore a torn white dress. Continuing to cry, she just stared at me. I finally said, "Leave me alone." Then she disappeared, but I could not sleep again that night. The next night, I dreamt that the spirit of another woman was choking me, and the crying lady from the previous night was standing right next to her watching. I then woke up and I couldn't breathe. It felt like somebody was in the room with me. I ran out of my room in the pitch black hallway and screamed. My parents came rushing upstairs. I feel that by chanting Bloody Mary, I somehow drew these spirits to me, and it was a very, very scary experience. Although I didn't like what happened to me, I still do want to explore the paranormal. However, I'm afraid of what might happen, and my parents think I'll go to hell if I continue. Thank you for listening to Master of Horror. Please like and subscribe, and please help me get to 1,000 subscribers. If you've made it this far, consider yourself a true Master of Horror fan. Well, my friends, goodbye for now. Sleep tight, and don't forget to leave the nightlight on. Hi there, and welcome to Master of Horror. These are 3 of the scariest paranormal stories that I've chosen from all the videos and stories that I've posted. These are also based on true stories. If you like what you hear, please like and subscribe. It really helps my channel out. Okay, my friends, now let's begin. True, scary, paranormal story number 1, The Mothman. In the 1960s, in West Virginia, Point Pleasant, many paranormal and unexpected sightings occurred. All of these sightings and experiences have been documented by the authorities and the newspapers. In November of 1966, two couples went on a date to a World War II dump site in Point Pleasant. They claimed as they were there, a large winged black creature with red glowing eyes chased them out of there. They reported the incident to the police. This marked the beginning of the paranormal events ever documented. The black creature would chase people to the ground. Many times, other people would suffer from bleeding eyes. Some people saw a giant mutated owl flying in the sky. People were beginning to see this Mothman in the sky, flying over their houses and even in their backyard. A resident claims that there was a Mothman standing by a tree about 7 foot tall, staring right at her as she was in her kitchen. She claims as she looked out the window and saw it, it had red glowing eyes. She said it then took off and flew into the sky. She swears on everything that it was not a bird or any other type of flying animal, and it was definitely not a human. Around this time, when things were getting really bad, the Washington Post, which is a newspaper company, heard about all the sightings that were occurring in West Virginia, Point Pleasant. John Klein, a reporter for the Washington Post and researcher, was sent to Point Pleasant. He lost his wife 2 years earlier in a car accident. He went to Point Pleasant, and there he started his investigation. While there, he had reported on many stories. What follows is an actual documentation of his contact with the paranormal. He was in a motel room, distraught and sitting on the bed. The phone then rang, and John Klein went to pick it up. The voice on the other phone sounded electrical and cut up, but it said,
"Hello, John Klein."
"Who is this?" replied John. It said,
"My name is Andrew Gold."
Before John could say anything else, it said,
"Your father was born and raised in Wisconsin. You lived in a greenhouse on Monroe Street, and you don't remember how your mother looked."
John knew this was not a hoax, so he said, "Okay, you have my attention." He then placed his watch in his shoe and placed his shoe under the bed. He asked the voice on the phone, "Where's my watch?" The voice said on the phone,
"Your watch is in your shoe, under the bed."
John then got up and closed the curtains to his motel room and turned off the lights, hoping that no one was looking in. He then sat back down on the bed, picked up chapstick and put it in his hand. He picked up the phone and asked, "What is in my hand?" Slowly, an electrical voice said,
"Chapstick."
At that point, John Klein became even more fearful of who he was speaking with. He got on the ground and pulled a book from the nightstand and quickly asked the entity on the phone, "Read me line 3, page 55. The entity said it word for word. John sat up for a few seconds and asked the entity, "What do you look like?" The entity replied,
"Why, it all depends on who's looking."
His next question was, "Can I please meet you?" The entity again quickly answered back and replied,
You already have, John. You already have.
The last question and the most important question in this conversation that John asked was, "What happened to my wife?" The entity then said,
You saw what happened to her. You were there. You cannot find her by looking. You will see her in due time.
The phone then flew off of John's ear through electrical static, and that was the end of the conversation with the entity. John Klein had an actual conversation with the Mothman. After the collapse of the bridge in West Virginia, Point Pleasant, in 1967, the sightings and the paranormal activity calmed down greatly to the point to where there was very little activity that was documented. Scariest and creepiest paranormal story number 2, the haunted Tallman bunk beds. In Wisconsin, in early February of 1987, Alan and Debbie Tallman purchased bunk beds at a secondhand shop. They stored them in their basement. 3 months later, in May of 1987, they moved the bunk beds upstairs to their kids' bedroom. This marked 9 months of paranormal and terrifying experiences for the family that has ever been recorded. Strange occurrences begin to happen nightly. The first night, the bunk beds were upstairs. Their oldest son went into his parents' room claiming that his radio clock was playing music by itself and turning through different stations on its own. Alan, the father, got upset thinking that his oldest son was being immature and just playing around, and took the radio away from him and warned him to behave. Another night, as their kids were asleep, they were awoken by something or someone crawling on the ground, portraying a dog and growling at them. Even though it was dark in their room, they could still see the outline of a dark shadow crawling in and out from underneath their bunk beds. Also, their daughter would explain that there was a fire in her room. When Alan and Debbie went to investigate, they found nothing. About a week later, one quiet night, Alan and Debbie heard their daughter screaming. When they came to see what was wrong, she claimed there was a witch with red eyes behind her bedroom door. Later that week, Alan Tallman came home from working night shift around 2 in the morning. After pulling in the driveway and getting out of his car, he began to hear howling in the wind. The wind began to pick up and the howling got louder. He then heard a voice say, "Come here," from around the side of the house. He walked over to the side of the house and there was nothing there. When he came back around the corner to the front of the garage, to his shock and to his horror, the garage was on fire with flames reaching past the rooftop. He quickly went into his house to retrieve a fire extinguisher, and when he came back outside, there was no fire, nor any indication of one. He walked inside his house and closed the front door in disbelief. As he reached down to pick up his lunch kit, it was thrown across the living room by an unknown entity. There was a night where Mr. Tallman had to go to work and asked his brother Todd to stay the night with his family to protect them from whatever was haunting their house. That night, around 2 in the morning, Todd was asleep on the floor of the kid's bedroom when he was awoken by a noise he heard coming from the closet. Fog began to slowly appear out of nowhere. He then sat up and stared at the closet door as it began to slowly open. What happened next will forever be a secret that no one knows. A bright light filled the room, and Todd witnessed something truly terrifying. He screamed and sat up, petrified, with no emotion on his face. We will never know what he saw, and to this day he doesn't want to tell anyone. He never said exactly what he saw at that moment. But Debbie entered the room and began to grab her children. She asked Todd what did he see, but he did not answer her. He slowly walked out of the room like a zombie, with no facial expressions at all. After about a minute, he then snapped out of it and began to get the rest of the kids out of that house, and they left the house that night. The family then immediately had the bunk beds crushed by a bulldozer, and not long after that, they moved out of their house, hoping that the ghost or entity would never follow them ever again. Scariest and creepiest paranormal scary story number 3, the Tatums. In the mid-1980s, in a quiet suburb near Atlanta, Georgia, Jim and Kate Tatum built a new home with plans to retire. But 5 months after they moved into their new home, the Tatums began to experience a series of paranormal occurrences that would ultimately force them to put their house for sale. One night, Kate Tatum could not sleep. She felt something was watching her outside her bedroom. When she got up to investigate, she saw a glimpse of a dark black figure walking past her open doorway. She told her husband Tim, and he searched the whole house with nothing to show for. Shortly after the incident, Kate began to just suspect that it may not have been an actual person, but maybe a ghost or a demon. 2 months later, one night in March, Jim was working upstairs on the house. He stopped working when Kate called him for dinner, and he unplugged his drill and put it to the side. As the evening wore on, Jim decided to watch a movie, while Kate went upstairs to read a book. 1 hour later, Kate heard the sound of the drill outside her bedroom. She thought Jim was teasing her about having seen a ghost, but before long she felt that the joke had gone on for way too long, and got up out of bed and walked into the hallway. It was empty, and the drill was unplugged, laying on the ground. When she knelt down to touch the drill to see if it was warm from being used, it was ice cold. Jim then bought Kate a bell to ring when she needed something. It was an angel bell that he had bought at a garage sale. This was because she had a surgery and was having trouble getting up out of bed, and he didn't want her to move around too much, especially after the surgery. One night, Jim heard the bell ring that's right next to her as she was sleeping. He went to go see what Kate needed. He found that Kate was sound asleep and the bell had not been moved. After the 3rd time of this happening, Jim had gotten tired of the teasing of the ringing bell by a ghost. So one day, when Jim and Kate were at the breakfast table, he whispered to her that only after ringing the bell 3 times, he would go up to see what Kate needed. But she would have to ring it 3 times, not once. Then and only then would he come upstairs. That very night, while Jim was downstairs watching TV, the angel bell rang 3 times, just as they talked about. Believing this time it was truly Kate, Jim went upstairs to see what she wanted. But again, to his shock and horror, Kate was sound asleep. Jim knew full well that something, an entity or a ghost, must have been hearing them, because not only did they say this to each other, but they whispered it. Jim picked up the angel bell and placed it on the dresser across the room, far away from Kate. As he walked away from the bedroom, through the doorway, the bell rang a fourth time. Jim said he got chills running up and down his arms. He said he felt as if something was standing right next to him and looking at him. The fear he felt at that moment was unexplainable. The Tatums later moved out of their home.